There is no way you cannot justify going after Maduro and pardoning Hernandez. So I am not sympathetic. Any rational person has to have lost sympathy with the position as a result of that pardon. It is indefensible and it is inexplicable. Look, I may have said this before. I'm going to say it again. When it came to what is happening in Venezuela, with Maduro, even the drug boats, which I'll get to in a second, but let's just talk about Maduro and Venezuela. You know, I was sympathetic to the administration. I was sympathetic because Maduro was clearly elected illegally. He wasn't elected. If you actually review any of the independent entities that were there, the guy lost by a lot. He cheated. He stole the election, right? Okay. Guy steals the election. Guy's a bad guy. He's a suspected drug trafficker. So from my perspective, it's not the end of the world if they get rid of him, right? It's probably a good thing. Now, how you go about doing that is, of course, important. Legitimate questions have to be asked. But I was pretty sympathetic to it. And I was thinking, you know, everyone's complaining, oh, regime change. Okay, we've done it before in this country. This wouldn't be the first effort we've ever made at regime change. And while there was no, the legal justification for the drug boats is tenuous at best, what we've learned about more recently is simply indefensible as a legal matter. I'll get to that in a second, but I want to start, though, with why it is impossible for any rational person to be sympathetic now to the administration's effort in Venezuela. Why? Because it's clear he's not doing it to oust a guy who got elected improperly. He's not doing it because he's a Latin American leader who's helping drugs come into this country. How do we know that? We know that because the president just pardoned a guy who falls into both of those categories. Guy who was probably improperly, illegally remained in power, even though he probably lost the election, and was an enormous drug trafficker. And this is Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras. And what I want to do, because not a lot of people are bothering to do this, is to go through with you a little bit of what the trial showed in that case, right? Oh, he was persecuted. Well, let's start there. Here's what President Trump is saying about why he pardoned him. This is number one. This is on Air Force One yesterday.
You've made so clear how you want to keep drugs out of the U.S. Right. Can you explain more about why you would pardon a notorious drug trafficker?
Well, I don't know who you're talking about.
Juan Orlando Hernandez.
Well, I was asked by Honduras, many of the people of Honduras, they said it was a Biden setup. I don't mean Biden. Look, Biden didn't know he was alive. But it was the people that surround the Resolute desk, surround Biden when he was there, which was about very little time. And the people of Honduras really thought he was set up and it was a terrible thing. He was the president of the country. And they basically said he was a drug dealer because he was the president of the country. And they said it was a Biden administration setup. And I looked at the facts and I agreed with them.
What evidence can you share that he was set up and that he wasn't?
Well, you take a look. I mean, they could say that you take any country you want. If somebody sells drugs in that country, that doesn't mean you arrest the president and put him in jail for the rest of his life. It's this country, okay?
That is exactly what they're doing with Maduro, except with Maduro, there is also evidence that he himself was engaged in drug trafficking. I mean, we are now living in a truly upside down world. So to make sure we're paying attention, here's some of the evidence. It was a 2-week trial in Manhattan, and prosecutors argued that he was the key to a scheme that lasted more than 20 years and brought more than 500 tons of cocaine into the United States. 500 tons. At trial, a lot of things came out. That Hernandez directed the police and military to protect smugglers who paid him off. He promised to protect them from extradition to the United States. He once reassured a cocaine trafficker in Honduras, and this came out during the trial, according to prosecutors, that by the time the gringos find out we will have eliminated extradition. He went on to boast, we are going to stuff the drugs up the gringos' noses and they're never even going to know it. That was according to a witness who testified at a 2021 trial of a drug trafficker. But again, I was sympathetic because Maduro wasn't elected. He lost. Well, in 2017, Hernandez became president after an election, and this is now quoting from the New York Times, so laced with allegations of fraud that days of violence ensued and about 24 people were killed as the military cracked down. Oh yeah, all the people of Honduras think it was all a frame-up, right? Well, they all love him. Now, it's important to understand the history here because Obama actually liked Hernandez, called him an excellent partner in preventing people from coming to the United States. Trump, in the first Trump presidency, supported him. The Biden administration considered him a key ally in Central America. So what happened? Well, his brother Tony was arrested in Miami after he was linked to a trafficking organization. And during his trial, a former Honduran mayor and major drug trafficker described how an associate of El Chapo, one of the worst, not just drug traffickers, but murderers, delivered a $1 million bribe in plastic bundles of $50,000 and $100,000 to him. There is no way you cannot justify going after Maduro and pardoning Hernandez. So I am not sympathetic. Any rational person has to have lost sympathy with the position as a result of that pardon. It is indefensible and it is inexplicable. Now, this is sort of connected to something where it seems that the administration is now having some trouble explaining what exactly happened in September when one of the alleged drug boats was fired upon. A couple people seem to have survived the initial bomb, the initial bomb, missile, whatever it was, strike. And they were hanging off the side of the boat, and apparently they ordered another hit on the boat to make sure that they got killed. Now, the Washington Post reporting that Hegseth had ordered that they should all be killed. Now, there is no evidence at this point that Hegseth specifically ordered the second strike, right? There was a commander who ordered it, but who was clearly responding to Hegseth's broader order. And Caroline Leavitt just held a press conference. I don't know exactly what she said here, but let's play. This is number 21. This is what she says about who gave the order for the boat strike.
Excuse me, regarding Venezuela, the president said yesterday that Secretary Hegseth had denied that second strike, that reported second strike on an alleged drug boat on September 2nd. The secretary said to the president that didn't happen. But to clarify, I just wanted you to clear this up. In his social media post, Secretary Hegseth didn't go into details about that strike. He just said U.S. operations in the area were lawful, and he said that the story and media reports were fabricated. So to be clear, does the administration deny that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
Oh, whoa. Two separate issues there. That the boat was destroyed. Okay, let's assume that they have the legal authority, right? Remember, every single justification legally of what's happening in these international waters is that it's self-defense. Every single one refers to self-defense. How is it even theoretically self-defense if two guys are hanging off of the edge of a burning boat? You have now stopped the quote unquote threat. You have two guys hanging off. It doesn't matter if let's assume there's a war, right? Let's assume we've been attacked. Let's assume a worst case scenario. These are bad guys. You still aren't just allowed under the rules of war to kill everyone. You can't just order, let's just kill them all. I mean, again, this is what happened with carpet bombing. The rules of war are clear on this. What I don't know is what, if anything, is ever going to happen as a result of this. And my guess is maybe nothing. But look, let's ask someone who knows about this a lot better than I do. Rachel Van Landingham, professor of law at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles. She's also a retired lieutenant colonel, U.S. Air Force. She was a former active duty judge advocate in the U.S. Air Force. Professor, thanks very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Dan, thanks for having me on.
Okay, let's just start with the really basic one. Is there any, professors like dealing in theoretical, right? Is there a theoretical defense to the second strike here? Meaning, if Hegseth's position is he didn't order it, then the commander who ordered it should be, I would think, be prosecuted. But maybe there's some other defense that you know of that I don't know. So tell us.
Well, as someone who advised on the laws of war while I was on active duty, I'm not just theoretical. And even theoretically speaking, there is no way, shape, or form that that order to conduct that second strike was lawful. Whether or not Admiral Bradley thought he was doing so under Secretary Hegseth's kill everybody order or not, it's a clear and fundamental principle of the laws of war that those who are ordered to combat, that is no longer in combat, even our direst most enemies, right? That once they're incapacitated due to, that means no longer able to fight due to wounds, sickness, or shipwrecked personnel, even if they're our dire enemy, once they're shipwrecked, the United States has a duty to both respect them, that is not kill them, as well as protect them, mount operations to rescue them, which should all have been in some kind of coordinated plan, a joint operation plan prior to this mission. And so the idea that the second strike is lawful under any stretch of anyone's imagination, any kind of theory that's at all linked to what the laws of war are, is fantastical and absurd. And that means those, and it's so, Dan, what's important to note here is this is one of those orders, Admiral Bradley's order to conduct that second strike. It's so clearly and manifestly unlawful that according to the manual for court-martial, military law, that it prompts a duty to disobey. Those who followed his order had a duty to disobey it, which means the individual that ordered that strike and those who carried it out are on the hook for murder.
Well, so there are two forms of justice, right? There's the Department of Justice, and there's also military justice, right? So we've got these two potential tracks. I can tell you, as a student of the Department of Justice and someone who's known Pam Bondi for a long time, and there is no way in heck that this Department of Justice is going to prosecute anyone for this. Okay, let's put that aside. Now talk to me about the military justice system. I mean, in theory, the military justice system is supposed to have a level of independence. So talk to us about it.
It's not, but the problem is it's truly not independent from the chain of command because Secretary Hegseth is a convening authority, and the top convening authority goes directly to the president. So the idea that the military would conduct a court-martial against Admiral Bradley and those who executed the orders is laughable. That's not going to happen. But Dan, I want to highlight that there is no statute of limitations for murder. And either under the Uniform Code of Military Justice or under federal law 18 U.S.C. 1111. So you would have to look at a presidential pardon, prospective pardon here, but that would then be admitting, right, that what they did was wrong and unlawful. And that doesn't pardon these folks from prosecutions under universal jurisdiction theories around the world.
Right. But so, look, Trump is going to make sure that no one gets prosecuted for this. And the idea that, it shows that Biden gave preemptive pardons to a bunch of people. It turns out Biden may have been wiser about this than many thought based on what we've seen from the Trump administration. But he would argue, and the people who got the pardons would argue, that they didn't do anything wrong, but that they were accepting them because they were worried about what the Trump administration would do. So I am confident that if this remains an issue when Trump leaves office, particularly if a Democrat is elected, that he will pardon them. But international law is an interesting question, right? And there are different laws that apply for things that happen in international waters versus happening on land. Talk to us about that and what specifically the international laws are that that apply in the water and what kind of enforcement mechanism there could be.
Sure. So, Dan, as you know, typically a state's, a nation's own laws don't apply extraterritorially. That is outside of its own actual territory. But there are certain types of crimes, such as war crimes, such as crimes against humanity, and such as genocide, that bring with them universal jurisdiction. That means regardless of where they're committed and regardless who commits them, it doesn't have to be one's own citizen. Because of universal jurisdiction, because of the level of atrocity these crimes represent, that the jurisdiction of any particular state that's actually implemented these crimes within their domestic law could and theoretically should, right, prosecute these.
But let's assume, they do. Where is this going to happen? How is it? I mean, how is it going to get enforced? I mean, this goes back to my question about theory versus reality, right? It does seem to me that if there is some sort of prosecution, that it really does become more theoretical than practical. Am I wrong?
I think you're correct in the fact that it's theoretical and it takes many iterations of getting past the current administration and what our allies would do with this. But at the end of the day, Dan, I think it's really important to stress that this is also about our service members and what they're being asked to do in the American people's name. And adherence to the law is one of the ways that our service members can do, pretty awful things out there, yet still look in the mirror in the morning. And because they have a moral compass, and that moral compass is maintained because they're in alignment with the law, whether it's the laws of war or a domestic law. So when they're told to do things that are not in alignment, and in fact are, if this actually was an armed conflict, would be a war crime, what is that? What kind of moral injury does that commit on our service members? And what message does that send to all our allies regarding our respect for very clear law of war?
Talking to Rachel Van Landingham, professor of law at Southwestern Law School, a former active duty judge advocate in the U.S. Air Force. It does, though, tell us that somebody turned Hegseth in, right? Someone who was in the room, right? Because this Washington Post story leaks now. We are now almost 3 months after this incident occurred. And after this incident, there was another bombing of a boat where there were survivors, where the survivors were actually sent back to their countries. And so that does suggest that there is someone inside who is trying to do the right thing.
I agree. And I think that it's not a coincidence that this was leaked soon after we had congressmen and women, led by Senator Kelly, that came out and said, look, you have a duty to disobey unlawful orders. And not only should you disobey unlawful orders, you actually have a duty to disobey unlawful orders. And then a few days later, this leak comes out, and that in fact there was what clearly on its face seems to be a war crime.
So again, to clarify, you don't see any road to accountability in the near future, right? I mean, your position is that maybe in a future administration. I mean, well, let me ask you this. I don't even know the answer to this. Can a president give any kind of preemptive pardon with regard to military justice?
Yes, because military justice is U.S. federal law, right? It's incorporated under the 10 U.S.C. chapter in the federal code. So absolutely, the president can pardon those in the military.
So that would mean there would be no, let's assume that President Trump were to preemptively pardon for whatever happened here, there would be no U.S. recourse for, well, I guess there could be a civil lawsuit, but no criminal recourse for what happened, correct?
Correct. I think you have to look at Congress, right? Congress has announced that they're investigating, bipartisan investigations, and Congress can, withhold promotions, right? Because all officers have to go before Congress every time they're promoted. Congress can withhold funding from, which they should have been doing all along, but withhold funding from these types of operations.
This is Representative Mike Turner. He's a Republican from Ohio. He's been a key member talking about potential oversight here. This is number 16.
Congress does not have information that had occurred. Both the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and ranking members have opened investigations. Obviously, if that occurred, that would be very serious, and I agree that would be an illegal act. That is not the legal opinion or the information or the legal justification, the acts that have been described to Congress that are being undertaken in this. There are very serious concerns in Congress about the attacks on the so-called drug boats down in the Caribbean and the Pacific.
I think it's a little confusing because we came in the middle of that piece of sound. But here is what President Trump said. So if you're wondering, was there a second strike? The administration isn't denying that there was a second strike. Here's President Trump yesterday talking about it. This is number 3.
If there were a second strike that killed wounded people wounded in the first strike, are you thinking that would be legal?
Number one, I don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that. Not a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine. And if there were 2 people around, but Pete said that didn't happen.
So, well, it's unclear what Pete said didn't happen. It seems that Pete Hegseth, is saying he didn't order that they go in. So let's assume that there was some level of legal accountability here. And Hegseth's position was, I didn't order them to go in and bomb for a second time. I just was saying it, colloquially. I was just saying, let's go in there, let's get them, let's kill them. And if there was an admiral who took that as me saying we should go in for a second strike, well, that's on him. Would that be a legal defense for someone like Hegseth?
Well, I mean, he can argue anything, but it really would get down to the facts and how they support his intent, right? What kind of statement did he make? Did he state, kill everybody? And without appropriately caveating that with, and don't forget your obligations under the laws of war, that, to rescue and protect anyone that's shipwrecked, and do this and so it really depends on how much was set up around this, because I think it's a pretty weak defense to say, my order to kill everybody, I didn't really mean that, if he didn't say anything, right? If he didn't have actual orders that supplemented the kill everybody, because kill everybody is known to be an order, it could definitely be interpreted as an order to take no prisoners, which is a no quarters order, which the admiral should have manifestly and patently, obviously, known was unlawful, and the admiral should never have followed it, right? So the admiral has his own liability there if he indeed received an order to just don't kill everybody. But I think for Hegseth, if he said just kill everybody, and he didn't caveat that appropriately, I think that's really telling. Again, I don't think we're going to have true accountability here, but what's helpful, though, if Congress can have open and transparent hearings on this, right, that provides for transparency and provides for lessons learned for the military. If this is what we don't do ever, again, to look for lessons learned going forward.